Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. The head of the U.S. military Central Command says the Taliban must reduce the number of attacks in Afghanistan. Addressing a Senate hearing, General Kenneth McKenzie said the Taliban's current actions are unhelpful for intra-Afghan talks. Under the Doha peace deal, talks between the Taliban and the Afghan government were scheduled to start on Tuesday, but this couldn't happen after the Taliban rejected a conditional release of 1,500 inmates for being in violation of the Doha Accord. A Taliban spokesman has said the group never agreed to a phased release of the prisoners. The Taliban are yet to respond to the U.S. general's statement. The UN has called on Afghan politicians to create a comprehensive government that is acceptable to everyone. UN's Special Envoy Tadamichi Yamamoto met with former Chief Executive Abdullah in Kabul. During the meeting, Yamamoto urged Abdullah to work towards a reconciliatory process which can resolve the political crisis. He said the current standoff between Abdullah and President Ashraf Ghani needs to be resolved in line with the Afghan constitution. Earlier this week, Abdullah and Ghani both swore themselves in as presidents of Afghanistan. Ghani is backed by the Election Commission and the US, while Abdullah enjoys the support of Rashid Dostum. The Pakistan Army says the path to peace and stability in the region passes through Afghanistan. This was said during a Corps Commanders Conference at the General Headquarters in Rawalpindi. In a series of tweets, the military's media wing said the conference reviewed the situation along the line of control as well as the regional security, with particular emphasis on Afghanistan. It also discussed the coronavirus pandemic. Pakistan's military chief, General Qamar Javed Bajwa, directed those present to support efforts to contain the virus. Turkey says it has largely reached an agreement with Russia on details of a ceasefire in Syria's Idlib region. A Russian delegation is in Ankara discussing the details, including a security corridor and joint patrols on the key M4 highway. Speaking to reporters in Ankara, Defense Minister Hulusi Akar said Turkish forces will maintain their presence on the southern border. He said military-level talks between both the countries are still underway in Ankara. Echoing Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's warnings, Akar said Turkey will continue its military offensive in Idlib if the ceasefire is violated. Last week, Turkey and Russia agreed on the truce to halt the escalation of violence in Idlib. The EU is deploying Frontex forces on Greece's border with Turkey as migrants continue to gather in the area. The European Border and Coast Guard Agency, also known as Frontex, is an EU body tasked with controlling the Schengen area's borders. A spokesman of the Border Guard Agency said a team of 100 officers will stay in the area for 2 months. This comes after Greece requested assistance at its land border near the Avros area. Earlier, Greek Civil Protection Minister met with the Frontex executive director to oversee the operation. Separately, Cyprus and Austria have also sent in forces to assist Athens. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization says 470 patients have been killed in Syria in 494 attacks on medical facilities over the past 4 years. It added the Syrian conflict has been one of the worst examples of violence affecting healthcare for years. The WHO said it's illegal to hit sites where the sick and the wounded are being treated under international humanitarian law. The UN Health Agency said the attacks were conducted in Idlib, Aleppo, and Hama provinces. Close to 1 million people have been displaced by the warring sides' offensives. The war in Syria has almost entered its 10th year. Damascus residents say they are lucky there's less violence around their city today, but the trauma from the past battle lingers on. More in this report.
Conflict grew out of popular protests against the regime of Bashar al-Assad in 2011. It then morphed into a violent insurgency and civil war after the government responded with crushing force. Since then, over 511,000 people have been killed. Some measure of calm has been restored in the capital Damascus after years of fighting. However, residents say they're still struggling to rebuild their lives.
How can I forget the war? Even after 10 years, I can't forget it. The war took the people dearest to my heart. It took my only son, Mazin, and it took my left arm from my body and left me with a permanent fracture in my leg. It took my house and my car.
There are others who have suffered even more gruesome injuries. One displaced resident living in a refugee camp near the border with Turkey has lost both his eyes and legs. Ibrahim Al-Ali's body is like a map of his miraculous but horrific journey through the bombing campaigns of northwestern Syria.
I was on my way back from work and was wounded by a landmine. That was the last day I saw the world. The landmine led, as you see, to my right leg being cut at the knee and my left leg also at the knee. And I lost my right eye completely and my left eye completely.
Most Syrians simply wish for a home they can call their own, where they won't have to worry about evictions or bombs from the sky.
I hope to have a home that no one can make me leave, whether awake or asleep. I'm dreaming about this because I'm tired of being displaced.
There are around 5.6 million Syrian refugees around the world, with an additional 6.2 million displaced inside the country. Much of the fighting is now restricted to the country's northwest, in and around Idlib province.
Turkey says it has killed 13 Kurdistan Workers' Party militants in northern Syria and Iraq. The Defense Ministry says 8 fighters were killed in Syria's Operation Peace Spring. It said the military killed 5 others in operations backed by air power in Iraq's Medina and Ghara regions. The ministry said Turkey will continue destroying weapon caches and shelters used by the terrorists. It said over 400 Kurdish militants have been killed in northern Iraq over the past 5 months. Turkey holds the PKK responsible for the deaths of some 40,000 people in a 30-year conflict. The UK has demanded Iraq take action against those responsible for a rocket attack that killed 1 British and 2 American personnel yesterday. In a statement, British Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab welcomed Iraq's president's call for an investigation into the attack. Raab said he has spoken with the US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and they agreed that it is essential to defend against these acts. Earlier, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson issued a statement condemning the attack. He said the UK will continue to cooperate with its international partners to understand the details of the attack. Iraq's presidency also condemned the attack, saying this aggression targets country's security. In recent months, tensions between Washington and Tehran have mostly played out on Iraqi soil. Iran-backed paramilitary groups have regularly been shelling bases in Iraq that host US forces in the area around the US embassy in Baghdad. The death toll from the new coronavirus continues to rise worldwide after WHO declared the outbreak a pandemic. The global health body says over 126,000 have been infected globally. In Spain, the health ministry said coronavirus infections soared to nearly 3,000 as the number of deaths rose to 84. It said there were almost 2,970 cases in the country, up from 2,140 yesterday. Poland, Algeria, Austria, Greece and Azerbaijan also reported their first deaths from the coronavirus. In South Korea, officials say nearly 7,900 people were infected, with the total death toll of 66. In Italy, there were 12,462 confirmed cases as the death toll stood at 827. France's coronavirus death toll rose by almost 50% to 48. The French health minister said new restrictions will be implemented to try and contain the outbreak. Meanwhile, in China, where the virus originated, the senior medical advisor says the global coronavirus pandemic is likely to be over by June. He added this would require other governments to take aggressive steps to contain the virus, like Beijing. The senior health official went on to say a lot of China's imported cases are asymptomatic patients and reinfection rates among recovered patients is low. The EU has criticized US President Donald Trump's decision to restrict travel from Europe over the coronavirus. In a statement, EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and Council President Charles Michel said the decision was taken without consultation. The statement said the coronavirus is a global crisis and it requires cooperation rather than unilateral action. It added the EU is taking strong action to limit the spread of the virus. Earlier, Trump imposed sweeping restrictions on travel from Europe for 30 days, hitting airlines and heightening global alarm. The move sent markets into a tailspin, with European shares plunging to their lowest in almost 4 years and oil also slumping. It also sent stressed travelers rushing to airports to board lost flights back to the US. Iran has asked the International Monetary Fund for $5 billion to help Tehran fight coronavirus outbreak. The demand comes after the IMF announced that countries affected by COVID-19 will be supported via rapid financial instrument. Iran's Foreign Minister Javad Zarif said the Monetary Fund's board should adhere to its mandate, stand on the right side of the history, and act responsibly. The Foreign Minister said Iran's central bank has requested access to facility immediately. The death toll from the new coronavirus in Iran has risen to 429, with over 10,000 people infected nationwide. It's time for a short break. We'll be back with more stories. Stay tuned. Welcome back. The US has accused Iran of not sharing detailed information regarding one of its sites with the International Atomic Energy Agency. In a statement to IAEA's Board of Governors meeting, Washington alleged that Tehran is stockpiling uranium at the site. The US said Iran has refused to address the agency's questions regarding possible undeclared uranium at a heavily sanitized location. Earlier, IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi said Iran's refusal to give UN nuclear inspectors access to certain sites is a serious matter. Grossi said the UN nuclear watchdog was only requesting the access under existing protocols. Rejecting the allegations, Tehran has argued that IAEA's suspicions are based on fabricated Israeli intelligence. The U.S. House of Representatives has approved a resolution limiting President Donald Trump's ability to wage war against Iran. With a handful of Republicans, the House voted 227 to 186 in favor of the legislation, which now goes to the White House for the president's approval. The measure means Trump must ask for the congressional approval before engaging in further military action against Iran. Supporters of the resolution said they want to ensure Congress's power to declare war is unique as outlined in the U.S. Constitution. Democrat Senator Tim Kaine, who introduced the resolution, said if Trump is serious about his promise to stop endless wars, he should sign it into law. It is virtually certain that Trump will veto the legislation. The coalition, which is mostly Democrats and a few Republicans, lacks the votes needed to override him. In Pakistan, the National Assembly has passed a child abuse law with a majority vote. Earlier, the Senate gave its approval to the legislation that seeks to expedite probes and punishments for the perpetrators. Under the Zainab Alert Response and Recovery Bill 2019, the police are bound to register a case within 2 hours of parents reporting a child missing. It includes measures to speed up the process, establishment of a helpline, and a new agency to issue alerts for a missing child. The law says the minimum punishment for the child sex abusers will be a sentence of 7 years and maximum will be the death sentence or life imprisonment. The bill has been named after a 6-year-old girl, Zainab, who was kidnapped, raped and killed in 2018. Pakistan has criticized India's ruling Bharatiya Janata Party for not condemning violence against Muslims in New Delhi. In its weekly press briefing, the Foreign Office asked New Delhi to end its anti-minority policies. Spokesperson Aisha Farooqi said the desecration of the Holy Quran and the holy places, including mosques and a shrine, has been reported in Delhi. Discussing occupied Kashmir issue, she said Pakistan condemns continued barbarism by Indian forces in the valley. Earlier, Foreign Secretary Suhail Mahmood met diplomats of 24 countries from Africa, Eastern Europe, South Asia and the Middle East. During the meeting, Mahmood highlighted Islamabad's efforts for peace and development. He apprised envoys on the country's perspective on the Kashmir dispute, Afghan peace and reconciliation efforts in the Middle East. World rights bodies have called for action to end the grave human rights situation in Indian-occupied Kashmir. In a joint statement at the UN, the International Commission of Jurists, Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International have highlighted Indian atrocities in the valley. They said 3 former chief ministers and pro-freedom leaders remain in detention under the controversial Public Safety Act. The international bodies asked Delhi to ensure independent observers and foreign journalists had free access to the valley and could carry out their work without fear. They asked the Indian government to release everyone detained without charge and remove restrictions on rights to freedom of expression and movement. They urged the UN to establish an independent international investigation mechanism into crimes in Kashmir. The valley has been reeling under India's curfew and the communications blackout for 221 days. In India, the ruling Bharatiya Janata Party has ambushed the democratically elected government in the state of Madhya Pradesh. After a one-on-one meeting with Amit Shah, Congress's top leader Jyotiraditya Scindia and 22 of his loyalists resigned after a day of high drama in the state. Scindia joined the ruling party after meeting Prime Minister Narendra Modi a day earlier. On Monday, the drama began when at least 17 Congress legislators said to be loyal to Scindia resigned and went in communicado. Since Scindia's resignation, 5 more Congress legislators have resigned, but the Speaker has not accepted any of the 22 resignations. Last year in July, BJP grabbed the Karnataka state in similar fashion after toppling opposition alliance government. Global media watchdog Reporters Without Borders has added India to the list of digital predators stifling free speech. In a report, RSF named countries which use digital technology to spy on and harass journalists, jeopardizing access to news. In the report, the body included Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's trolls for calls for rape and death threats to journalists. It also identified Indian Ministry of Home Affairs for limiting access to information by disconnecting the internet in occupied Kashmir. It said Hindutva supporters are trying to purge all manifestations of the so-called anti-national thought from the national debate. The body said online harassment campaigns are particularly virulent when the targets are women. Japan has said the latest projectile launched by North Korea threatens peace and security in the country and the region. Speaking in Tokyo, Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshide Suga said that multiple projectiles landed in the Sea of Japan. He said Pyongyang's repeated ballistic missile launches are a serious issue for the international community. Suga said the missiles might have traveled 100 to 200 kilometers and fell outside Japan's exclusive economic zone. On Monday, North Korea launched multiple short-range projectiles as part of the ongoing fighting drills.
Repeated launches of ballistic missiles in the past are a serious issue for the international community as a whole, including Japan.
Russia says all the sides have agreed to endorse a new mechanism for settling the Donbass conflict at its next meeting on 25th of March. At the meeting in Minsk, the trilateral group backed agreements on preparing for the disengagement of the forces and a prisoner swap in the near future. The deputy chief of the Russian presidential staff, Dmitry Kozak, said they also agreed on cooperating to find political solutions to the conflict. He described the Minsk meeting as constructive, saying he hopes the next meeting of the contact group will make a final decision. Kozak said the new proposal is aimed at creating a dialogue platform involving countries of the Normandy format and conflicting sides. Fighting between Ukrainian forces and the Russian-backed fighters in Donbass has killed more than 30,000 people since 2014. Iran has agreed to send black boxes from a downed Ukrainian jetliner to Kiev for analysis. Tehran has until now refused to hand over the flight recorders of the jet it shot down on 8th of January, killing all 176 people on board. Aviation official Farhad Parvaresh said Tehran has also invited other interested countries to participate in data reading. Responding to development, Canadian Foreign Minister François-Philippe Champagne called it a step in the right direction. Talking to media, Champagne said it will transfer the boxes to France if need be. Ukrainian ambassador to Canada, Andriy Shevchenko, said Iran's announcement is an important result. 4 teenagers have been stabbed in East London, the latest in the country's string of knife attacks. Police said 3 of the victims have non-life-threatening injuries, while the condition of the 4th victim is unclear. Police said they have arrested 7 people on charges ranging including violent disorder, fray, and possession of an offensive weapon. Police have now been given additional stop and search powers across Walthamstow, Leighton and Leytonstone. Scotland Yard said there was no risk to members of the public and say it was an isolated incident. In Chile, students have ramped up anti-government protests as the country marks 3 decades of democracy. The protesters clashed with police in the streets of Santiago, marking a day of civil disobedience and calling for the president to resign. President Sebastián Piñera has been under fire for strong police response to the protests, including the use of tear gas. Earlier this week, the beating of an elderly protester by a police officer shocked the nation, with citizens calling for justice. Meanwhile, addressing an event at the presidential palace, Piñera said Chile must combat violence and care for democracy. He said the country must learn from the lessons of the past 3 decades as well as the past 5 months.
Personal de carabineros.
Personnel from the police force brutally and sadistically beat an elderly person in Santiago who was on the ground, defenseless, who represented no threat. This undoubtedly is another typical case of police abuse, of the police brutality that we have expected and which should be sanctioned and punished.
Típico.
In Turkey, the ancient town of Hasankeyf, which has stood on the banks of the Tigris River for 12,000 years, is slowly drowning every day. The town, widely seen as a jewel of human history, will soon be a victim of the Eliso Dam project. More in this report.
Hasankeyf is a city under threat. This 12,000-year-old settlement in eastern Turkey is sinking under the waters of the Tigris River, rising ever higher as a result of a controversial dam project. Its residents are trying to salvage what they can as they question what future commercial opportunities will remain.
I used to work in the tourism industry. I sold pamphlets. I told the story of this place. But unfortunately, in the last few months, no one has come here except journalists.
Some locals try to focus on the benefits the dam will bring to other parts of the region's economy, which they feel has been neglected by the Turkish government in the past.
Above all, it's good for the energy sector and for power generation. But it will also be useful and beneficial for agriculture.
The Ilisu hydroelectric dam is destined to become the second largest in the country, a huge project that has displaced many into the new Hasankeyf. For the project's critics, the dam will not only swallow up a historic city, but also erase part of the identity of this Kurdish-majority region.
When you look at the landscape, it's a clear destruction of history that we're witnessing. Did Turkey really need that dam? We keep asking that question.
With the canyon encased in concrete and water engulfing this historical landmark a little more every day, many wonder what Hasankeyf will look like tomorrow.
Angola has been hard hit by climate change. After years of drought, the country has lost most of its water resources, devastating crops. Details in this report.
Climate change has had a devastating impact on the people of Angola's Huila province. Amid the collapse of the agricultural sector, men have migrated to towns and cities in search of work. This has led to the collapse of the local family system, hitting women and girls particularly hard. One local female farmer says the ongoing famine has torn her family apart.
He left because of hunger. There was a time when he used to buy food for the children. They used to share the work, but when the hunger got bad, he decided to go.
An NGO worker explains that when men abandon their families, young girls are forced to step in as surrogate parents.
Because of families being separated or abandoned, we find a lot of families with a single parent. So it is the girls that end up helping their mothers in one way or another. So they're likely to stop studying. They first need to provide for their basic needs.
For now, the situation shows no signs of improvement. On the rare occasion that it does rain, the downpour is so violent, crops suffer even more damage.
We had been waiting for rain for 6 months, 6 months without rain, and before that we had winter. When the rains came, we were so thankful, we were relieved. But they came too hard, and then we had no way of tending to our crops. We were not able to get to the fields.
Women make up 80% of the people displaced by climate change. The UN warns 45 million people face a growing malnutrition in southern Africa.
More stories to follow, but right after a short break. Stay tuned with Indus News. Lows and the highs of the business world now as the spreading tentacles of the new coronavirus choke economies across the world. Global markets are tanking, hitting a new low every day, while the drastic decrease in travel has sent oil prices tumbling. Global financial institutions and the governments have pledged over $617 billion to mitigate the economic impact of the outbreak so far. More in this report.
The global economy has been rattled by the coronavirus pandemic, and the world's economic outlook is in shambles. To cushion against the economic fall, the IMF has announced a $50 billion support fund, while the World Bank committed $12 billion in aid for countries grappling with the pandemic. Earlier, the U.S. House of Representatives approved an $8.3 billion emergency fund, while President Donald Trump committed an additional $250 billion in stimulus measures. Together, European countries have committed over $81 billion in injected stimulus packages to fight the disease, while the EU has pledged over $28 billion.
We will bring forward a Corona Response Investment Fund directed at the healthcare systems, directed at SMEs, and at the labor markets, and other vulnerable parts of our economies. The instrument will be sizable and reach 25 billion euros quickly.
In East Asia, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore and South Korea have pledged over $30.5 billion. Down under, Australia has announced it will pump over $11.5 billion into its economy.
This package, over the course of the budget and the forward estimates, will inject some $17.629 billion into the Australian economy in a series of measures which are designed to support cash flow, boost investment and provide immediate demand stimulus to the Australian economy.
China, the epicenter of coronavirus, has announced it will inject over $170 billion as stimulus measures to fight off the virus's economic impact. Experts say it is premature to say if the hundreds of billions of dollars worth of stimulus would be enough to avoid a global economic recession.
Wall Street stocks have crashed into bear market territory after President Donald Trump banned travel from Europe. Trump's remarks failed to deliver the comprehensive economic and medical response to the outbreak, which investors were anticipating. The indices of S&P 500 and Nasdaq Composite traded nearly 7% lower. The shares of cruise line dropped sharply besides a decline in airline stocks. The Dow Jones Industrial Average Index traded nearly 8% lower. Travel restrictions have hit the already sluggish market activity following the coronavirus outbreak. Oil prices have dropped after Saudi oil company Aramco announced it will be raising its output capacity. The company said the announcement has been made following the directives of the country's energy ministry. In a statement, Aramco's president Amin Nasser said the company will raise the capacity from 12 million to 13 million barrels a day. The West Texas Intermediate crude for April delivery settled the price as over $30 a barrel on the New York Mercantile Exchange. Earlier, OPEC and Russia failed to strike a deal on oil production cuts, dropping the prices sharply. The market was already under pressure after data showed an increase in the U.S. crude stocks. Lebanon has decided to accept IMF's recommendations to tackle its worsening financial and economic crisis. The country has come up with a plan days after the country declared it would not be able to repay its debt bonds. Speaking in Beirut, Finance Minister Ghazi Wazni said Lebanon welcomes all international financial assistance without expectations. He said the Lebanese pound's official exchange rate would be maintained for the foreseeable future to control inflation. Wazni said there should be political understanding on the IMF program. Lebanon's financial crisis is widely seen as the biggest risk to the country's stability since the end of its 15-year-long civil war.
We fear that if a flexible monetary policy is adopted without constraints, that it would reflect negatively on the parallel market. Currently, we will keep this policy in order not to increase inflation, and we consider a flexible policy later on.
And now the weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus News.